The winter night hung cold and still over the Arizona desert in 1908. Stars crowded the black sky like scattered diamonds, indifferent to the two figures seated beside the small fire outside the cabin. The old man, Nathan Cross, at 66 years, sat with the patience that only decades of hard living could teach. His hands, scarred and weathered, rested on his knees. Across from him, his grandson Samuel, barely 16, fidgeted with the nervous energy of youth. The boy had found the photograph earlier that day while helping his grandfather organize old papers. A woman's face, Apache features, unmistakable eyes that seemed to hold both sorrow and strength. Samuel had asked the question young people always ask when they discover their elders had lives before them. Who was she? Nathan had been quiet for a long time. Then he had built the fire and told Samuel to sit. You see that picture? Nathan's voice carried the roughness of age, but also something else. Authority. The kind that came not from position, but from having lived through things that tested a man's soul. Yes, sir, Samuel answered. The firelight caught the resemblance between them. The same strong jaw, the same deep-set eyes, though Samuel's were still unlined by the hard truths Nathan had learned. That woman taught me about honor, about standing firm when everyone else turns away. Nathan paused, watching the flames dance. You know, I was a deputy sheriff once. Yes, sir, Mama told me you quit sudden-like, never said why. Nathan's mouth moved, not quite a smile, not quite a grimace. That's right, but being a deputy isn't when I learned honor. That's when I lost it. Samuel leaned forward, the question clear on his young face. Nathan picked up a stick and stirred the fire. Sparks rose into the darkness like tiny, desperate prayers. A man can lose everything. Money, land, reputation. But if he loses his honor, he's not a man anymore. He's just meat walking around pretending. The old man's eyes fixed on something beyond the fire, beyond the present moment, looking back across 30 years to a different time, a different version of himself. Fall of 1878, Nathan said quietly. I was 36 years old. Thought I knew who I was. Thought I'd made peace with the choices I'd made. I was wrong about both things. Samuel waited, knowing instinctively that interruption would break whatever spell his grandfather was weaving. Let me tell you about that year, Nathan continued, about the woman in that picture, about the choice that changed everything. Because soon this ranch will be yours, boy, and you need to understand what it means, what you'll be responsible for keeping alive. The fire crackled, the wind whispered through the sagebrush, and Nathan Cross began to speak of 1878, his voice carrying his grandson back across the decades to a time when the West was still being written in blood and hard choices. The fall, the dust had barely begun to settle when Nathan Cross heard the horse. He was working the western fence line 8 miles out from the small town of Red Mesa. The afternoon sun hung low and brutal, turning the desert into something that shimmered and shifted like it wasn't quite real. He'd been at it since dawn, replacing wire that the previous winter's cold had made brittle and useless. Nathan looked up from the fence post, pliers still in his hand. The rider came hard and fast, kicking up a trail of pale dust that hung in the still air like smoke from a distant fire. Even from a distance, Nathan recognized the man. Cole Brennan, bounty hunter. Sometimes martial, always dangerous. The kind of man who made the desert feel smaller and meaner just by being in it. Cole didn't slow much as he approached. His horse, a big roan gelding that had seen too many hard miles, came to a sliding stop 15 feet from where Nathan stood. And then Cole did something that made Nathan's stomach go cold and hard. He reached back, grabbed someone, and pulled. The woman hit the ground with a sound that was somehow both soft and terrible. She didn't scream. That was the first thing Nathan noticed. She made no sound at all as she fell, as her shoulder took the impact as the dust rose around her like she was something thrown away and forgotten. But she moved immediately. That was the second thing, despite the fall. Despite what must have been pain and exhaustion, she pushed herself up on one elbow. Her arm was wrong. Even from where Nathan stood, he could see the dark stain of blood, the way she favored it, held it close against her ribs. The sleeve of her buckskin dress was torn, dirt and blood mixed in equal measure. Her face, though, Nathan would remember her face for the rest of his life, not young, not old. Somewhere in the middle of living, maybe 25. Her skin was the deep brown of oak bark, her hair black as a moonless night and hanging in tangles around her shoulders. But it was her eyes that stopped him, dark and fierce and absolutely refusing to break. She looked at him the way a cornered mountain lion looks. Measuring distance, calculating odds, preparing to fight even when fighting meant dying. Nathan's hand tightened on the pliers. He didn't move toward her. Not yet. Cole Brennan swung down from his horse with the easy grace of a man who'd spent more time in the saddle than on solid ground. He was 43 that year, though he looked older. A scar ran from his left cheekbone to his chin, white against weather-darkened skin. His cavalry pants were faded but clean, his shirt dusty but whole. He still carried himself like a soldier, back straight, movements economical. "Keep her alive," Cole said. Not a request, not quite an order, something in between. 3 days. Don't let her run. Don't touch her more than you have to. Nathan found his voice, though it came out rougher than he'd intended. "What is this?" Cole looked at him, then really looked, and Nathan saw something in the other man's eyes he hadn't expected. Weariness. Deep and bone-tired weariness. "Business. $50 from the territorial government for every Apache relocated, delivered alive and unharmed to Fort Bowie. She's not livestock. Government says different." Cole gathered his reins, preparing to mount. "I'll be back in 3 days. Have her ready." "And if I don't," Cole paused, one foot in the stirrup. For a moment, something passed between them, an understanding that this conversation was about more than one injured woman in the dirt. Then Cole shook his head slowly. "Then we'll have a problem cross, and neither one of us wants that." He swung up into the saddle, turned the roan's head toward the distant mountains, and rode away without looking back. The sound of hoofbeats faded. The dust began to settle, and Nathan Cross stood alone with the woman on the ground, the pliers heavy and useless in his hand. She watched him. She didn't plead, didn't speak, didn't show fear, just watched with those dark eyes, her breath coming shallow and quick, her injured arm held close, waiting to see what kind of man he was. Nathan set the pliers down carefully on the nearest fence post. The metal clinked softly against wood. He stood there for a long moment, looking not at her, but past her toward the town of Red Mesa, 8 miles distant. He could take her there, turn her over to Marshall Garrett, wash his hands of the whole thing. It would be the safe choice, the smart choice. But 3 years ago, he'd made the safe choice, the smart choice, and 12 people had died because of it. Nathan Cross had learned painfully and too late that a man's measure isn't found in his comfort or his safety. It's found in what he does when nobody's watching, in the choices he makes when all the choices are hard. He looked back at the woman. Their eyes met and held. "You can stay," he said quietly, though, the words coming from somewhere deeper than thought, someplace where the man he wanted to be lived alongside the man he'd been, "until you're strong enough to leave." Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes, not trust, not yet, but maybe the first small seed of it planted in hard and uncertain ground. The careful work. Evening came fast to the desert. One moment the sun hung low and red, the next it was gone, and the temperature began its nightly plunge toward cold that would make a man grateful for any kind of fire. Nathan moved slowly, deliberately, keeping his movements predictable as he approached the woman. She'd managed to get herself sitting upright, back against a fence post, good arm wrapped around her knees. The injured arm she held stiff and still. The blood had stopped flowing, but the wound looked bad. Deep scrapes, bruising already starting to purple at the edges, dirt worked into the torn skin. Nathan stopped 6 feet away, close enough to speak without shouting, far enough that she wouldn't feel cornered. "I need to clean that," he said, nodding toward her arm. "It'll get infected if I don't." She said nothing, just looked at him with those measuring eyes. "I've got carbolic acid. It'll burn like hell, but it'll keep the wound from going bad. And I've got clean bandages, needle and thread if it needs sewing." He paused. "I'm not going to hurt you, but I won't lie to you either. This is going to be painful." The woman's eyes moved from his face to his hands, then to the cabin behind him, then back to his face. Nathan understood. She was calculating, running through possibilities, looking for the trap. He'd seen animals do the same thing when injured. Trust came hard when the world had taught you that people were dangerous. "My name's Nathan," he offered. "Nathan Cross. This is my land. Has been for 3 years now, bought and paid for under the Homestead Act." He gestured toward the cabin. "That's where I live, alone. No one else for 8 miles in any direction." Still, she said nothing. Nathan took a breath. "I know you speak English. Brennan wouldn't have left you here if you couldn't understand what I'm telling you." He waited. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to get water and my medical supplies. You're going to decide whether you want help or whether you want to take your chances with that arm. Either way, it's your choice. He turned and walked toward the cabin, fighting the instinct to look back to make sure she wasn't running, wasn't pulling some hidden weapon. He'd given her a choice. Now he had to trust her to make it. Inside the cabin, Nathan moved quickly. The space was small, 16 feet by 20, with barely room for a man who lived alone and liked it that way. One bed against the wall, one table, two chairs. A cast iron stove for heat and cooking. Shelves that held his rifle ammunition tools, a few books he'd read so many times the pages were soft as cloth. He gathered what he needed, clean cotton cloth he'd boiled the week before and kept wrapped tight. A small dark bottle of carbolic acid purchased from Doc Henderson in Red Mesa. Needle and silk thread for sutures, a bowl for water. Whiskey, though he wasn't sure if that was for her or for him. When Nathan came back outside, the woman was standing. Barely. She'd gotten herself upright using the fence post, and she stood there, swaying slightly, her good hand gripping the wood like it was the only thing keeping her attached to the earth. Stubborn, Nathan said quietly, not sure if he was approving or criticizing. I can walk, she said. The first words he'd heard from her. Her voice was low controlled, carrying an accent he couldn't quite place. English learned carefully from someone who'd taken time to teach it right. I believe you, but you don't have to. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she took one step, then another. Her legs shook but held. Nathan resisted the urge to help, knowing instinctively that she needed to do this herself, needed to prove to herself that she could. She made it to the cabin door. Nathan held it open, stepped back to give her room. She entered slowly, eyes taking in everything. The rifle on the wall, the door to the bedroom, the windows, escape routes, potential weapons. He could almost see her mind working, cataloging, preparing. Nathan set his supplies on the table. You can sit here, he gestured to one of the chairs, or the bed's through there if you'd rather lie down. Here, she said, and lowered herself carefully into the chair. Nathan lit the lamp, adjusting the wick until warm yellow light filled the small space. He poured water from the pitcher into the bowl, laid out the cloth, the carbolic acid, the needle and thread. She watched every movement. I need to see the wound, he said. She hesitated, then slowly moved her injured arm onto the table. The buckskin sleeve was stiff with dried blood. Nathan took his knife, the one he'd used earlier, to cut wire and carefully cut the sleeve away. The woman flinched at the sound of tearing fabric, but made no other sound. The wound was worse than he'd thought. Not one injury, but several. Deep scrapes where rope or leather had torn the skin. Bruising so dark it looked black in the lamplight. And along the forearm, a gash that definitely needed stitches. This is going to hurt, Nathan said again. I won't lie about that. But if I don't clean it properly, you could lose the arm. Infection kills more people out here than bullets do. She nodded once. Understanding. Accepting. Nathan worked the way he'd been taught years ago by Doc Henderson when he'd been a young deputy who sometimes had to patch up cowboys too proud or too poor to see a real doctor. First, he washed his own hands thoroughly with soap and hot water. Then he cleaned the wound itself with water that he'd boiled earlier and let cool. The woman's breath hitched, but she didn't pull away. The carbolic acid came next. He diluted it the way Doc had shown him, 1 part acid to 20 parts water. Still strong enough to burn, weak enough not to damage the tissue. Ready, he asked. She nodded, and he saw her jaw clench, muscles standing out in her neck. Nathan applied the solution. The woman's entire body went rigid. Her good hand gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles went white. But she didn't scream, didn't make a sound beyond a sharp intake of breath through clenched teeth. While he worked, memory came unbidden. 3 years ago, October 14th, 1875. Nathan had been a deputy then, working under Marshal Tom Garrett. He'd heard the men talking at the saloon. 15 of them drunk and angry about cattle they claimed the Apache had stolen. They were planning a raid on the camp at East Canyon. Nathan had known. He'd heard every word, and he'd done nothing, said nothing, because he was afraid. Afraid of losing his job, his $30 a month. Afraid of being called a traitor, an Indian lover. Afraid of standing alone against 15 armed men. The next morning, 12 people were dead, 8 women, 4 children. Nathan had quit a week later, took his savings, filed a claim under the Homestead Act, bought this land, and tried to become someone who could live with silence. He shook the memory away and focused on the present, on the woman in front of him who was very much alive and deserving of his full attention. The sutures came next, 4 of them, small, neat stitches that pulled the edges of the gash together. Nathan's hands were steady. The woman's endurance was remarkable. By the time he'd finished and wrapped the arm in clean cotton bandages, tied firm, but not too tight, his respect for her had grown into something solid and undeniable. "Done," he said, quietly stepping back. She looked at her bandaged arm, flexed her fingers carefully. Then she looked at him. "You know medicine. Enough to keep cattle alive, people sometimes. You've done this before." "A few times, never enjoyed it much." He began cleaning up the supplies. "You need food, water, rest. The bed's yours. I'll sleep outside." "You're not afraid I'll run?" Nathan paused, considered. "If you could run, you already would have. Besides," he glanced toward the window where full dark had fallen. "Out there in the night, injured like you were, you wouldn't make it 2 miles before the cold or the coyotes got you." She studied his face. "You're honest. Lying takes too much energy." For the first time, something that might have been almost a smile touched the corner of her mouth. It was gone so quick, Nathan couldn't be sure he'd seen it at all. She stood still, shaky but stronger than before. "The bed," Nathan pointed to the doorway. "Through there." She moved slowly, one hand trailing along the wall for balance. At the doorway, she paused and looked back. "Thank you," she said, 2 words in that low, controlled voice. Then she was gone into the darkness of the bedroom. Nathan gathered his blanket, his rifle, and stepped outside into the cold night air. He settled on the wooden step that led up to the cabin door, the Winchester across his knees, unloaded, but within reach. Above him, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human suffering, indifferent to human redemption. Inside the cabin, he could hear the woman's breathing. Rough at first, ragged with pain and exhaustion, then slowly, gradually evening out as she found something like sleep. Nathan sat in the darkness and thought about choices. About the choice he'd failed to make 3 years ago. About the choice he'd made today. About how sometimes the same decision could be both the hardest and the easiest thing in the world, depending on whether you'd learned what cowardice cost. The night deepened. The temperature dropped. Nathan pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders and kept his vigil, a man alone with his conscience and a second chance he hadn't known he had been looking for. Morning light, dawn came the way it always did in Arizona, sudden and unforgiving. One moment the world was dark, the next it was painted in shades of red and gold that turned the desert into something almost beautiful. Nathan had been awake for an hour, already had been awake on and off through the whole night, listening to coyotes in the distance, to the wind moving through the sagebrush, to the sounds of the woman shifting in her sleep inside the cabin. He stood stiff and sore from the cold joints protesting as he moved. 36 wasn't old, but years of hard work had a way of settling into a man's bones, making him aware of every mile he'd traveled, every fence post he'd set, every mistake he'd carried. The routine was the same as it had been for 3 years. Nathan moved through it with the automatic precision that comes from repetition. First, the cattle. He had 12 head of Texas Longhorns, 3 horses, 8 chickens. Small operation, but it was his work, for honestly, under the law, belonged to him in a way that his deputy's badge never had. The cattle were already stirring as he approached, their breath making clouds in the cold morning air. 25 pounds of hay each, drawn from the stack he'd put up in summer. The work was methodical, almost meditative. Fork the hay, spread it out, count the animals, check for injuries or signs of illness. Next came the water trough. This far out in the desert, water was everything. Nathan had spent 3 months digging. The well had gone down 40 feet through rock and sand before he'd hit the aquifer. Every drop was precious, had to be monitored, protected. He checked the level, made sure the windmill pump was working properly, oiled the bearings that kept it turning. The milk cow came next, a Jersey, good-tempered and reliable, who gave about 3 gallons a day. Nathan had learned to milk by hand years ago, found a rhythm in it that settled his mind. The warm milk hissed into the bucket, and he made a decision. He'd leave a third of it for the woman. Protein would help her heal. The fence inspection came after. Arizona had predators. Coyotes, mountain lions, the occasional wolf. The barbed wire had to be checked daily for breaks, for places where animals had tried to push through. Nathan found one section sagging, the wire loose enough that a determined cow could have escaped. He pulled out his tools and went to work. This was when he saw her. The woman stood in the cabin doorway, one hand braced against the frame, watching him. She'd slept in her torn buckskin dress, her hair still tangled, but her posture was straighter today, her eyes clearer. The bandage on her arm was clean and white in the morning light. Nathan didn't stop working, didn't acknowledge her directly, just kept his movements slow and predictable, let her watch. Let her take her measure of him in her own time. After a while, he walked back toward the cabin carrying the bucket of milk. He set it on the step, then went inside to make breakfast. Cornmeal mush bacon from the pig he'd slaughtered and spring coffee strong enough to wake the dead. He didn't call her, didn't invite her, just set food on the table near the door and took his own plate outside to eat on the step, where she could see him, where she'd know he wasn't blocking her path if she wanted to leave. She came out slowly, took the plate, the cup of coffee, ate standing up, her back to the cabin wall, her eyes on him and on the land beyond. Watching, always watching. "Coffee's hot," Nathan said without looking at her. "Sugar's in the tin if you want it." She ate in silence. The food disappeared quickly, and Nathan understood she'd probably gone days without eating properly. When she finished, she set the plate down carefully and spoke. "You wake early. Cattle don't care if I'm tired. You do this alone. For 3 years now." Why alone? Nathan paused, considering how much truth to offer. He'd spent 3 years avoiding truth, hiding from it, pretending the past didn't exist. Maybe it was time to try something different. Because after you make certain choices, he said slowly, people tend to keep their distance. And sometimes you keep your distance from them too, because you're not sure you deserve anything better. She didn't respond to that. Just looked at him with those dark, intelligent eyes, processing, understanding more than he'd said out loud. The morning wore on. Nathan went back to work on the fence, showing her through his actions what his life was, how he spent his days, the care he took with small things, the way he worked steadily, without hurry, without complaint. The woman watched from various positions around the yard, moving slowly but moving, testing her strength, her arm, her ability to function in this strange new place. Around mid-morning, she spoke again. "This land, it's yours." "Yes." "How?" Nathan straightened, wiped sweat from his forehead. "Homestead Act, 1862. Government gives you 160 acres if you work it for 5 years, make improvements. Prove you're serious about settling. They give you land. If you're white, yes." He met her eyes. "If you're not, well, the government takes yours instead." Her expression didn't change, but he saw the recognition there. The understanding that he knew exactly what he was talking about, what the implications were. Nathan gestured toward the surrounding desert, the distant mountains. "Land doesn't care who owns it on paper. It only cares who tends it. I've learned to tend it right." That seemed to satisfy something in her. She nodded slowly and went back to her quiet observation. By noon, the heat was building toward the brutal peak it would reach by mid-afternoon. Nathan led her to the one spot on his property that offered real shade, and old cottonwood that had been there long before he'd arrived. He'd set up a simple bench underneath it, and now he gestured for her to sit. She did, and he sat, too careful to maintain distance to give her space. They sat in silence for a long time. In the distance, one of the horses whinnied. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals only it could feel. The world moved on, indifferent to the strange truce forming between two people who had every reason to distrust each other and were choosing carefully and cautiously to try something else instead. Red Mesa. The afternoon of the second day found Nathan riding toward Red Mesa, the town 8 miles distant, that served as the only real hub of civilization in this part of the territory. He needed supplies, bandages, flour beans, coffee, the things that kept a man and his unexpected guest alive. He'd left the woman at the ranch, had explained where he was going, how long he'd be. She'd nodded her understanding, hadn't asked to come along. They both knew that showing her face in town would be asking for trouble neither of them needed. The ride took 2 hours, and Nathan used the time to think about what he was doing, about what it meant, about how long he could keep this arrangement before it all fell apart. Cole Brennan would be back in one more day. The town didn't know yet, but they would. Secrets had a way of getting out, especially secrets involving Apache women and white ranchers living alone. Red Mesa appeared on the horizon like something out of a fever dream, wavering in the heat, never quite solid until you were right on top of it. 300 souls called it home, more or less. a main street of hard-packed dirt buildings that looked like they'd been thrown together in a hurry and never quite finished. The saloon, the general store, the marshal's office, the church. The basic elements of civilization pressed into the desert's face like a dare. Nathan tied his horse outside Sarah Mackenzie's general store. Sarah was 39, a widow, 3 years now since consumption had taken. Her husband left her with a 12-year-old daughter and a business to run. She was one of the few people in Red Mesa who still spoke to Nathan with something like warmth. The bell above the door rang as he entered. Sarah looked up from the counter where she was tallying accounts, and her face showed both pleasure and concern. Nathan, haven't seen you in 2 weeks. Needed supplies. She came around the counter wiping her hands on her apron. Her hair was brown going to gray, pulled back in a practical bun. Her eyes were sharp, kind, and entirely too good at reading what people weren't saying. Let me see your list. Nathan handed over the paper. Sarah's eyebrows went up as she read, bandages, extra flour, you hurt. Just being prepared. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded and began gathering the items. Nathan watched her work, appreciating her efficiency, her lack of unnecessary questions. The supplies came to $2.60. Nathan paid in silver coins, the metal clinking on the wooden counter. As Sarah wrapped everything in brown paper, she spoke quietly. You've got that look again. What look? The one you had after you quit being deputy, like you're carrying something heavy. Nathan didn't answer, didn't trust himself to. Sarah tied the package with twine, her movements practiced and sure. I don't know what you're mixed up in, Nathan Cross, but I hope you know what you're doing. So do I. He was turning to leave when Marshal Tom Garrett walked in. The marshal was 51, had been wearing a badge for 20 years, and had the hard, tired look of a man who'd seen too much and still had to keep looking. His mustache was going gray, his sheriff's star polished bright despite the dust that covered everything else. Cross. Marshal. Garrett's eyes moved from Nathan to the package on the counter, taking in the size of it, the quantity of supplies. Heard there's Apache trouble east of here, some ranchers losing cattle. I keep my cattle close. You keep everything close these days. Garrett stepped closer, his voice dropping. Don't see you in town much anymore. I come when I need to. The marshal's eyes, pale blue and calculating, fixed on Nathan's face. Lot of bandages for one man living alone. Accidents happen. It wasn't quite a lie, not quite the truth either. The kind of statement that left room for interpretation, for doubt. Garrett frowned but didn't push. Nathan nodded once and walked out, feeling the marshal's gaze on his back all the way to his horse. Outside, the afternoon sun beat down with physical weight. Nathan loaded his supplies, preparing to mount when he saw the poster. It was nailed to the wall of the saloon, the paper still white, and knew the ink fresh enough that he could smell it. Territorial notice. $50 reward. For each Apache delivered to Fort Bowie, alive and unharmed, by order of Arizona Territorial Government. Nathan stared at it. $50. 2 months' wages for some men. The price the government had put on human beings, on people who'd been here long before any white man had thought to call this place a territory. A rancher standing nearby spat tobacco juice into the dust. About time they cleared them savages out. Make this country safe for decent folk. Nathan didn't respond, just mounted his horse and turned toward home, the poster's words burning in his mind like a brand. The ride back gave him time to think about what he'd seen. The poster, the $50, the casual hatred in that rancher's voice. 3 years hadn't changed anything. The same anger, the same fear, the same willingness to see Apache as less than human. Nathan had lived with his silence for 3 years, and it had nearly destroyed him. He wouldn't make that mistake again. The sun was low when Nathan arrived back at the ranch. The woman was where he'd left her, sitting in the shade of the cottonwood. She looked up as he approached, her dark eyes measuring, assessing. Nathan dismounted, began unloading the supplies. She stood and walked over, her movements steadier today, the healing beginning to take hold. Everything okay? She asked. Fine. She looked at his face, and he had the uncomfortable sense that she could see through him, past the word to the truth underneath. But she didn't push, just helped him carry the supplies inside, moving carefully, favoring her injured arm, but not letting it stop her. That evening they sat outside again as the day cooled into night. The stars were just beginning to appear faint against the darkening blue. Nathan had made a simple dinner beans and cornbread, and they ate in comfortable silence. When the meal was done and the dishes cleaned, the woman spoke. "You haven't asked my name." Nathan looked at her, then away out toward the horizon. "Figured you'd tell me when you wanted to." She was quiet for a long time. Then Kaya, "It means little sister in my language." Nathan Cross. Cross. Well, she tested the word. Like a burden, Shirat. Like a crossing, or maybe both. Kaya nodded slowly. "I have a father, Dakota. It means friend to everyone. And a brother, Nikon. Friend also." "Your parents believed in peace." "My mother did." Kaya's voice went soft, distant. "She died believing it." Nathan's hands tightened on his knees. He knew where this was going, could feel the weight of it approaching like a summer storm on the horizon. 3 years ago, Kaya continued, East Canyon, men with torches and guns and hate. I know about it. The words came hard, forced past something tight in his throat. Kaya turned to look at him fully, her eyes searching his face. How? Nathan took a breath. This was it, the moment of truth, the place where he could either continue hiding or finally face what he'd done, what he hadn't done. I was deputy sheriff then. I heard them planning it. 15 men, drunk, angry about cattle they claimed were stolen. I could have warned your people, could have stopped it. I didn't. The silence that followed was absolute. Even though Kaya stood slowly, her body rigid. You knew this, yes. And you did nothing. I was afraid of losing my true, afraid of being called a traitor. I chose silence. Her voice when it came was shaking. My mother died because you were afraid. Yes. Kaya turned away from him, her shoulders trembling. Nathan sat very still, offering no excuses, no justifications. Just the bare truth, ugly and unadorned. 5 minutes passed, maybe more. When Kaya turned back, there were tears on her face, silver tracks in the starlight. I should hate you. You have every right. I should leave, go back to my people and tell them there's a coward living in a ranch alone. I won't stop you, but you saved me. That doesn't erase what I didn't do. No, her voice was fierce, now angry. It doesn't. So why risk everything for me? Nathan stood to face her, knowing this was the most important question he had ever been asked. Because I've lived 3 years hating myself for staying silent. I won't make that mistake again. Not even if it costs me everything I have left. Kaya's eyes searched his face, looking for lies, for self-serving justification. Nathan offered none, just stood there exposed and vulnerable, letting her see the truth of him. I can't forgive you, she said finally. Not yet, maybe not ever. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I won't leave, not tonight. Why? She wiped at her tears with her good hand. Because my mother believed people could change. She believed in second chances. Maybe I owe it to her memory to see if she was right, to see if you can be better than you were. Nathan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. They stood there in the darkness, two people bound by tragedy and the fragile hope of redemption, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not trust, but maybe the first small steps toward both. A second chance, Nathan thought, isn't given. It's taken. By doing what you should have done the first time, even when it's harder, even when it costs everything. Above them, the stars wheeled on, ancient and indifferent. Below, two souls tried to find their way forward, one painful step at a time. Dawn on the 4th day brought Jacob Miller to Nathan Cross's ranch. The boy was 19, thin from hunger and uncertainty, riding a horse that looked as tired as its owner. He dismounted awkwardly, clutching a pair of worn work gloves like they were proof of his seriousness. Nathan was already up, had been for hours. He watched the young man approach, taking his measure the way a man learns to measure others, when his survival depends on reading people right. Jacob had honest eyes, the kind that hadn't learned to hide much yet. His clothes were patched but clean. His boots had seen better days, but were well cared for. Mr. Cross, Jacob's voice carried the careful politeness of someone who'd been taught manners and remembered them even when hungry. I'm Jacob Miller. Got a piece of land 2 miles east, inherited from my uncle who died sudden last spring. Nathan nodded. I know the place. What can I do for you? I don't know how to run a ranch. The admission came hard, like pulling a bad tooth. Uncle died before he could teach me anything. Left me 80 acres but no instructions on what to do with them. Sarah Mackenzie at the store, she said you might be willing to help. Said you know the land better than anyone. Nathan considered. He'd lived alone for 3 years, had chosen that isolation deliberately. Teaching meant involvement, meant connection, meant all the things he'd been avoiding. But he looked at Jacob's face, at the desperate hope there, and remembered being young and lost and needing someone to show him the way. From the cabin doorway, Kaya appeared. She'd been up as well, had heard the conversation. She caught Nathan's eye and spoke in Apache words he didn't understand, but whose meaning was clear in her tone. Help him. Teach him. Nathan looked back at Jacob. Come back tomorrow at dawn. Bring those gloves and be ready to work. The transformation in Jacob's face was immediate, like sunrise breaking over the desert. Really? Thank you, Mr. Cross. I won't let you down. Call me Nathan, and don't thank me yet. Ranching's hard work. You'll earn every lesson. I'm not afraid of hard work, sir. Good, because you'll be doing plenty of it. Jacob's eyes had found Kaya standing quiet in the doorway. Surprise registered on his face, followed by uncertainty. He'd probably heard the stories, the warnings about Apache, about how dangerous they were. But he had the grace to nod politely. Ma'am? Kaya didn't speak, just inclined her head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, nothing more. Nathan spoke into the awkward moment. Her name's Kaya. She's recovering from injury. She doesn't talk much. Respect that. Yes, sir. After Jacob left kicking up dust as his horse carried him back toward his own struggling piece of land, Kaya walked over to where Nathan stood. You're going to teach him. Seems that way. Why? Nathan picked up the wire cutters he'd been using earlier, felt the weight of them in his hand. Because someone helped me once. Old rancher named Dutch Vanderberg taught me everything I know about working land. He's dead now, 6 years gone. Maybe it's time I pass some of that on. That's good. Kaya's voice held approval. Teaching keeps knowledge alive. Keeps the teacher alive too, in a way. Nathan looked at her. Your mother taught you things. Sadness crossed Kaya's face, brief but deep. Everything. How to tan hides, make medicine from plants, read the stars. Track animals, survive. I was supposed to teach my own children someday. You still can. If I live long enough, if there's a world left for Apache children to grow up in. They stood in silence, both understanding the weight of what she'd said. The uncertainty that hung over everything, the knowledge that in 2 days Cole Brennan would return, and all of this fragile piece they'd built, might shatter like glass dropped on stone. The next morning, Jacob arrived before the sun cleared the horizon. Nathan was impressed. Punctuality mattered, showed respect for other people's time. They started with the basics, with fence repair, because a ranch without good fences wasn't a ranch at all. Nathan showed him how to check wire tension, how the metal should hum like a guitar string when you plucked it tight enough to hold, but not so tight it would snap in winter cold. He demonstrated setting posts, how to dig the holes 2 feet deep in hard Arizona soil, how to tamp the earth firm so the post wouldn't shift when cattle pressed against it. A fence is only as strong as its weakest post, Nathan said as they worked. Same with men, same with communities. One weak point and the whole thing falls apart. Jacob dug and sweated and asked questions. Good questions, the kind that showed he was thinking beyond just the immediate task to the principles underneath. Kaya watched from a distance, at first, then gradually moved closer, her curiosity overcoming her natural wariness. Can I try, she asked when Nathan was demonstrating how to splice wire, wrapping 2 pieces together so they'd hold under tension. Jacob looked surprised but handed over the pliers without comment. Kaya's fingers, long and dexterous, moved with confidence. She wrapped the wire 6 times, pulled it tight, tested it with a sharp tug. Perfect on the first attempt. How did you do that? Jacob's admiration was genuine. Apache women weave, Kaya explained. Baskets, cloth, leather, ties. Same principle, different material. Nathan nodded. Skill transfers, something my old teacher Dutch used to say. You learn one thing while really understand it, and that knowledge helps you learn other things. The principles stay the same even when the tools change. They worked through the morning, and Nathan found himself falling into a rhythm he hadn't known he'd missed. The satisfaction of teaching, of watching understanding dawn in someone else's eyes. Around noon, they broke for lunch, sitting in the shade of the cottonwood, eating jerky and drinking water from the well. Mr. Nathan, Jacob said, then corrected himself. Nathan, can I ask something? Go ahead. Sarah mentioned you used to be a deputy, said you were good at it. Why'd you quit? The question hung in the hot air. Nathan took a long drink of water, giving himself time to decide how much truth to offer this earnest young man who was looking at him like he had answers worth hearing. I made a mistake, Nathan said finally. A bad one, cost people their lives. Jacob waited, sensing there was more. I stayed silent when I should have spoken up. Let fear rule me instead of courage. People died because of it. Nathan met the boy's eyes. I quit because I couldn't wear that badge anymore. Couldn't pretend I deserved it. And now I try to do better. That's all any man can do. Learn from his failures and try not to repeat them. Kaya had been listening and now she spoke. My mother used to say that tools change, but the hands that use them must always be strong and wise. I think she was talking about more than just tools. Nathan looked at her, saw the acknowledgement there, the recognition that he was trying to be the man he should have been 3 years ago. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. A door left open instead of slammed shut. The afternoon brought lessons in water management. Nathan showed Jacob how to check the well level with a rope and Rock how to maintain the windmill pump that brought water up from 40 feet below, how to clean the trough weekly to prevent algae, how to calculate water needs for a herd based on the brutal mathematics of desert survival. Apache find water differently, Kaya offered. We watch animals watch plants. Cottonwood trees mean water is close. Certain mosses grow only where moisture stays near the surface. Show us, Nathan said. Kaya walked 50 feet from the well, stopped, knelt down. She examined the soil, the plant roots, the subtle changes in color that most eyes would miss. Then she pointed at a spot. Dig here. Water at 15 feet. Not as deep as your well, but enough for a small garden. Jacob looked skeptical. How can you tell? My people have lived on this land for more generations than yours can count. We learn to read it the way you read words on paper. The land tells us its secrets if we know how to listen. We'll test it tomorrow, Nathan said. If you're right, Jacob learns 2 methods. Can't hurt to have more than one way of finding water out here. By late afternoon, Jacob was exhausted but glowing with the satisfaction of work well done. When he finally mounted his tired horse to head home, he looked like a different person than the uncertain boy who'd arrived at dawn. Same time tomorrow, he asked. Same time. Thank you, both of you. He included Kaya in his gratitude, and Nathan saw her eyes soften slightly at the recognition. After Jacob had gone, Kaya turned to Nathan. You're good with him. Patient. Like my mother was when she taught the young ones. Teaching's new to me. You're natural at it. Some people can do a thing but can't explain it. You can do both. Nathan felt something warm settle in his chest, pride maybe, or just the simple human need to be seen, to be valued. He makes it easy. He wants to learn. That's half the battle right there. They walked back toward the cabin as the sun began its descent, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. The day had been good, productive, almost normal. But both of them knew what was coming. Tomorrow would be the 6th day, and the day after that, Cole Brennan would return. The question that neither spoke aloud hung between them like smoke. What would happen then? What choice would Nathan make? What choice would Kaya discover? The 5th day brought John Hollis riding past Nathan's property on his way to check his own cattle grazing in the foothills. Hollis was 45 brother to the William Hollis, who'd led the raid on East Canyon 3 years prior. William had died in 1876, the year after the raid, in a skirmish with Apache warriors, and John blamed them for his brother's death, the way some men blamed weather for drought, assigned responsibility without ever examining cause. He was riding the boundary line between his land and Nathan's when he saw her. A woman clearly Apache, from the buckskin dress and the way she moved, hanging laundry on a line Nathan had strung between 2 posts. The sight stopped Hollis cold. For a moment he just stared, his mind working through the implications. Nathan Cross, the coward who'd quit his deputy job without explanation, was harboring an Apache woman. Had to be harboring her because no Apache woman would be here voluntarily, not this close to a white settlement. Hollis turned his horse and rode hard for Red Mesa. This was information that needed sharing, needed action. The authorities had to know. He burst into Marshal Tom Garrett's office like a man carrying news of an invasion. The marshal looked up from the paperwork he'd been half-heartedly working through, saw the agitation in Hollis's face and sighed. What now, John? Nathan Cross is hiding an Apache woman on his land. Saw her with my own eyes not 30 minutes ago. Garrett's expression shifted from boredom to alertness. You certain? Do I look blind? Buckskin dress, black hair down to her waist, dark skin, clear as day. Could be a Mexican woman, could be a traveler passing through. Don't insult my intelligence, Tom. I know an Apache when I see one. My brother died fighting them, or did you forget? The marshal hadn't forgotten. Nobody forgot things like that in a place like Red Mesa, where memory was long and forgiveness was short. He stood buckled on his gun belt, settled his hat on his head. I'll gather some men. We'll ride out and have a conversation with Mr. Cross. Conversation. Hollis's face flushed red. He's breaking the law, harboring the enemy. We don't know that yet. Could be she's there against her will. Could be. He's got a reasonable explanation. We ask questions before we start making accusations. But Hollis was already spreading the word, moving through town like a man possessed, telling anyone who would listen. At the saloon, men drinking away the afternoon heat muttered and cursed. At the general store, customers whispered behind their hands. Even at the church, where Reverend Thompson was preparing Sunday's sermon, the news filtered in and sparked debate. Sarah Mackenzie heard it from a customer, a woman who delivered the information with the barely disguised glee that some people took in other people's troubles. Sarah's face went pale, then set in determined lines. Nathan Cross is a good man, she said firmly. If he's helping someone, there's a good reason. Good men don't hide savages, the customer shot back. They killed my cousin in '74, or don't you remember? Sarah remembered. Everyone remembered. That was part of the problem. All anyone seemed capable of remembering was the violence, the deaths, the reasons for hate. Nobody wanted to remember the causes, the broken treaties, the land theft, the cycle that fed on itself like a snake eating its own tail. By 4 o'clock, Marshal Garrett had assembled 8 men, all armed with rifles and pistols, some carrying torches, even though the sun wouldn't set for hours yet. The torches spoke to intention, to what they expected this to become. John Hollis was among them, his jaw set, his eyes hard. Sarah tried to intervene. Tom, you don't need guns for a conversation. This is official business, Sarah. Stay out of it. Then I'm coming with you. The hell you are. Could get dangerous. That's exactly why you shouldn't be going at all. But Garrett and his posse were already mounting up, already turning their horses toward Nathan Cross's ranch 8 miles distant. Sarah watched them ride out, her stomach tight with dread. She made a decision quickly, the kind that comes from knowing what's right, even when it's hard. She went back to her store, told her daughter Emma to mind things for a few hours, and retrieved the shotgun her husband had left behind when consumption took him. Then she mounted her own horse and followed at a distance, staying far enough back that the posse wouldn't send her home, but close enough that she'd arrive before things got too far out of hand. At the ranch, Nathan and Kaya were finishing an early dinner when the sound of multiple horses reached them. Nathan moved to the window, looked out, counted. 8 riders, all armed. His stomach dropped. Riders, he said quietly. Many of them. Kaya was on her feet instantly, her injured arm forgotten. How many? 8, armed. They're coming here. Her eyes met his, and in them he saw not fear, but calculation. She was already planning, already thinking through options. They come for me. They come through me first. Nathan moved to the wall where his Winchester hung. The model 1873 44-40 caliber 15 rounds in the tube magazine. He checked the load, found it full, grabbed extra ammunition from the shelf. His Colt Peacemaker went into the holster at his hip. 6 rounds, 45 caliber, enough to stop a man permanently if it came to that. Kaya had found the knife he'd given her, a good hunting blade with a 7-inch edge. She held it with the comfortable familiarity of someone who'd used such tools before. I can fight, she said. I know you can, but I'd rather you didn't have to. They positioned themselves, Nathan at the door, Kaya at the window where she could see but stay back from direct fire if shooting started. Both knew what was coming. Both prepared themselves for the moment when talking would stop and violence would begin. The posse arrived in a cloud of dust, horses snorting and stamping. Marshal Tom Garrett dismounted first, the others following his lead. They spread out in a loose semicircle surrounding the cabin's front entrance. The sun was behind them, putting Nathan in shadow when he stepped outside. Tactical positioning, intentional or not. Nathan Cross, Garrett's voice carried authority, the kind backed by law and guns and the weight of community opinion. Come out where we can see you. Nathan stepped into the light rifle in his hands, but not aimed at anyone. Not yet. Tom, this is my property. And I'm the law. Got reports you're harboring an Apache woman. That true? I'm helping an injured woman, that's all. John Hollis pushed forward, his face twisted with anger. She's Apache. That makes her the enemy. Enemy of who, John? You. Enemy of all decent white people, enemy of civilization. My brother died fighting her kind. Your brother died attacking people who weren't attacking him. There's a difference. The crowd muttered, voices rising in anger. Someone shouted, hand her over. Another yelled, Indian lover. The words cut through the air like thrown stones, hard and meant to hurt. Nathan's grip tightened on the Winchester. She's not property to be handed over. She's a person. Government says different. Another voice from the crowd. $50 bounty says so right on the poster. I don't care what the government says. Garrett's voice cut through the noise. Nathan, don't make this harder than it has to be. Just let us take her. We'll transport her to Fort Bowie, everything legal and proper. Legal and proper doesn't make it right. You're talking sedition now. I'm talking truth, uncomfortable truth, but truth nonetheless. Then Kaya stepped out. She moved to stand beside Nathan, her posture straight, despite the healing injury, her eyes sweeping across the assembled men without fear. Several of them raised their rifles, fingers moving to triggers. I am Kaya, she said, her voice clear and steady. Daughter of Dakota, I am Apache. I am also a person with thoughts and feelings and the right to live. You're a savage, Hollis spat the word like poison. And you are a man who judges others by birth instead of actions. Who is more savage? The crowd erupted in shouts. Nathan felt the situation spiraling, felt the moment approaching when words would give way to bullets. He had to do something, had to shift the dynamic somehow. He raised his voice, shouting over the noise. You want to know why I'm protecting her? I'll tell you. The crowd quieted slightly, curiosity overcoming anger for just a moment. 3 years ago, October 14th, 1875, East Canyon. Nathan's voice carried across the space between them, hard and uncompromising. I was deputy sheriff. I heard John Hollis's brother William and 14 others planning to attack an Apache camp. I knew what they were going to do. Some of the men shifted uncomfortably. Not everyone had forgotten that night how the raid had been kept quiet, how nobody wanted to talk about what had really happened. I could have stopped it, Nathan continued, the words coming like blood from a wound. I could have warned those people. I didn't. I was afraid. Afraid of losing my coup, afraid of being called what you are calling me now, a traitor, an Indian lover. I stayed silent. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the horses seemed to hold still, sensing the weight of what was being said. 12 people died that night, 8 women, 4 children, and I knew it was coming. Kaya's mother, Ayana, was one of them. So don't talk to me about savages. Don't talk to me about enemies. I've seen what we're capable of, and it's no better than anything the Apache have done. Worse, maybe because we claim to be civilized while we're doing it. John Hollis's face went purple with rage. You're admitting to dereliction of duty. I'm admitting to cowardice. I'm admitting to being complicit in murder. And I've lived with that for 3 years. But I'm done being a coward, done staying silent. If you want her, you'll have to go through me. Marshal Garrett opened his mouth to respond when another horse appeared, Sarah Mackenzie, riding hard, the shotgun visible across her saddle. She pulled up at the edge of the group, her face flushed from exertion, but her eyes steady. He's right, she said loudly. We did terrible things. Called it justice, called it defense, called it civilization. But it was murder, plain and simple. And if we do this now, if we take this woman by force, we're no better than the men who rode that night. Whose side are you on, woman? Hollis demanded. The side of not becoming monsters. The standoff continued, tension thick enough to choke on. Several of the men looked uncertain, now looked like they were rethinking their presence here. Others, Hollis chief among them, looked ready to resort to violence. Then a new voice cut through the moment. Well now, this is quite the gathering. Everyone turned. Cole Brennan sat his horse 30 feet away, his Schofield revolver visible, but holstered his rifle in the scabbard on his saddle. He'd appeared from the direction of the hills where he'd been camped and watching, and his timing was either incredibly lucky or perfectly calculated. "Who the hell are you?" Garrett demanded. Cole touched the brim of his hat in mock politeness. "Bounty hunter. Name's Cole Brennan, and that Apache woman is my contract." Hollis smiled triumphantly. "Then take her." Cole urged his horse forward slowly, his eyes moving from face to face, reading the situation with the practiced ease of a man who'd been in more standoffs than he could count. He stopped beside Nathan, looking at him, then at Kaya, then back at the assembled crowd. "I've been watching this ranch for 3 days," Cole said conversationally. "You know what I've seen? A man trying to do right, a woman healing, and a young fellow learning to be a rancher. Lot of good, honest work getting done. What's your point?" Garrett's patience was wearing thin. "My point is that I'm tired of hunting people, tired of the violence, tired of becoming the thing I swore I'd never be." Cole's voice carried a weariness that spoke to years of hard living and harder choices. "My wife, before she died, she told me not to let hate poison me. I didn't listen. Been 5 years now, and I think it's time I started listening to her." Nathan looked at him sharply. "Cole, I'm releasing my contract, Marshal. The woman stays with Cross. I'm done with this work." "You can't just walk away from money," Hollis protested. "Watch me. I've got more blood on my hands than I can wash off in a lifetime. I don't need to add hers to it." Cole turned his horse. "I'm heading east, going to find a place where I can work with my hands and maybe sleep at night. Any of you tries to stop me, we'll have a different kind of conversation." Nobody moved to stop him. Cole Brennan rode away, and with him went the certainty that had been driving the mob forward. Garrett looked at his men, saw the doubt there, the hesitation. "Everybody stand down," the marshal said finally. Cole released the contract. "Nathan's land is his business. We're leaving." "This is a betrayal." Hollis's voice rose almost to a shriek. "This is me choosing not to start a bloodbath over one woman who hasn't hurt anyone." Garrett mounted his horse. "Let's ride." The posse dispersed slowly, reluctantly, casting dark looks back at Nathan and Kaya. All except Sarah, who dismounted and walked over to stand beside them, the shotgun now held loosely in her hands. "You two okay?" she asked quietly. "We are," Nathan said. "Thanks to you." Sarah shook her head. "I didn't do much, just reminded them they were human. Some of them, anyway." As the last of the riders disappeared toward Red Mesa, Kaya spoke softly. "They'll come back." "Maybe," Nathan agreed. "Probably, but not today." Sarah looked between them, seeing something in their faces that made her smile slightly. "You two have done something remarkable here. Don't let them take it away." The sun was setting now, painting the desert in shades of purple and gold. Sarah mounted her horse, gave them a small wave, and rode away toward town, and the daughter waiting for her and the life she'd risked by speaking up. Nathan and Kaya stood alone in the fading light, both knowing they'd won only a temporary reprieve. But temporary was better than nothing. Temporary meant time, and time meant possibility. "One more day," Kaya said. "Then Cole would have come back anyway. But now he won't." "No, now he won't." They walked back to the cabin together, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Kaya reached out and touched Nathan's arm. Just briefly, just a gesture of connection, of gratitude, of something neither of them was ready to name yet. "Thank you," she said, "for standing with me, for telling the truth even when it cost you." It was long past time I told it. That night, Nathan didn't sleep outside. The threat had shifted, become more complex. If people came back, they'd come ready for a fight. He needed to be inside, ready to defend the cabin itself. Kaya didn't object, just nodded her understanding and took the bed, while Nathan settled on the floor with his blanket and rifle. The darkness pressed close. Outside, coyotes sang their eternal songs. Inside, two people who'd been strangers a week ago tried to find rest, knowing that tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own hard choices. Echoes in the dark, the sixth-day dawn quiet, too quiet. The kind of stillness that makes animals nervous and smart people careful. Nathan woke before light, his back stiff from sleeping on the wooden floor, his mind already working through the day ahead. Tomorrow Cole would have come back if he'd kept his contract. But Cole was gone now, riding east toward whatever redemption looked like for a man who'd spent years dealing in human suffering. But the problem hadn't gone away. Red Mesa knew about Kaya now, and knowledge was dangerous in a place where people measured their safety by how far they could push others away, by how many enemies they could identify and eliminate. Jacob arrived at dawn as usual, noticed immediately that something had changed. The tension in Nathan's shoulders, the way Kaya moved closer to the cabin than she had before, the rifle leaning against the door frame instead of hanging on its usual wall hooks. "Everything all right?" the young man asked. "Had visitors yesterday," Nathan said. "Word's out. People know she's here." Jacob looked at Kaya, then back at Nathan. "What are you going to do? Keep going, keep working, keep living?" That's all anybody can do. They spent the morning on the lessons Nathan had planned, working the cattle, checking for injury and illness, teaching Jacob how to read the signs that told when an animal was suffering, even when it couldn't speak. Kaya joined them, and Nathan found himself explaining not just to Jacob, but to her as well, sharing knowledge that had been passed to him by Dutch Vanderberg years ago. "Cattle hide pain," Nathan explained as they examined one of the cows, checking its legs and hooves. "Predators target the weak, so animals that show weakness don't survive long. You have to look for subtle things, the way they hold their weight, whether they're eating normally, whether they stay with the herd or separate." "People are like that too," Kaya observed. "Hide their pain because showing it makes them targets." Nathan met her eyes, understanding the layers in that statement. Sometimes, though sometimes hiding pain for too long makes it worse. Infection sets in. By the time it shows on the outside, it's already rotted the inside. They worked through noon, taking a break for water and dried meat in the shade. Jacob asked questions, good questions, about water rights and grazing permits and the legal framework that governed life on the frontier. Nathan answered as best he could, drawing on his years as a deputy when he'd learned more about law than he'd ever wanted to. Around 2 in the afternoon, Kaya suddenly went very still. She was looking toward the eastern hills. Her body language shifted from relaxed to alert in an instant. "What is it?" Nathan asked quietly. Signs," she said. "My people, they're close." Nathan looked where she was looking, but saw nothing. Just rock and scrub and the shimmer of heat rising. "What kind of signs?" "Rocks arranged in a pattern. 3 stones stacked leaning west. It means scouts have passed through, heading toward the setting sun." "Recent, last night, maybe." Jacob looked nervous. "Is that good or bad?" "Neither," Kaya said. "Just information. My father is looking for me. He sent scouts to find where I was taken." Nathan felt the situation shifting again, new complexity layering onto what was already complicated enough. "Will they come here?" "Eventually. They're careful. They'll watch first, make sure it's safe, make sure this isn't a trap." She looked at Nathan. "When they come, you should know. My father is Dakota. He leads our band. About 60 people trying to negotiate with the territorial government for land where we won't be pushed off again. And your brother, Nikin, 3 years older than me, hot-tempered, brave, very protective." She smiled slightly. "He wanted to be the one to ride south to make the trade agreements with the Mexican villages. I convinced my father I should go instead. That's when Cole and his men caught me." The afternoon wore on. Jacob left as the sun began its descent, promising to return the next day, his young face troubled by the complications swirling around the simple ranch where he'd come just to learn how to work land. That evening, Nathan and Kaya sat outside, watching the sky turn from blue to purple to black. Neither spoke much. Words felt inadequate for what they were both thinking, for the knowledge that their time together was being measured not in weeks or months, but in days, maybe hours. "When your people come," Nathan said finally, "what will you tell them about me?" Kaya was quiet for a long time. "The truth, that you saved me when you didn't have to, that you stood against your own people to protect me, that you're trying to be better than you were." "Will they believe you?" "I don't know. Nikin won't want to. He sees all white men as enemies after what happened to our mother. But my father, he still believes peace is possible. He'll listen. And then I'll have to choose. Go with them back to my people, or stay here where I'm a target that puts you in danger." Nathan wanted to tell her to stay, wanted to say that the danger didn't matter, that they'd face it together. But he remembered his promise to himself to never pressure her, to let her make her own choices free of obligation or guilt. "Whatever you decide," he said, "it has to be yours, not mine, not your father's. Yours." She reached over and took his hand, her fingers warm and strong. They sat like that as the stars emerged, two people from worlds that had been at war longer than either of them had been alive, trying to find a different way forward. Violence in the dawn. The attack came at first light on the seventh day, when the world was caught between darkness and dawn, when vision played tricks and shooting was more guesswork than aim. Nathan woke to the sound of horses, multiple riders coming fast and hard, and his heart dropped into his stomach. He rolled to his feet, grabbed the Winchester, moved to the window. 5 riders armed and moving with purpose. Not townspeople this time. These men had a different look. Harder, more professional. Bounty hunters drawn by the promise of $50 and word that Cole Brennan had walked away from easy money. Kaya, Nathan's voice was urgent but controlled. We've got company, bad company. She was up instantly, the knife in her hand, moving to the window on the opposite side of the cabin. Together, they watched the riders circle the building, looking for weaknesses, planning their approach. One of them, a big man with a beard that looked like it had never seen a comb, called out, "Nathan Cross, we know you got an Apache woman in there. Send her out and we'll leave peaceful like." Nathan recognized the voice. Taggart, a bounty hunter who worked the Southern Territories, known for being brutal and efficient in equal measure. Not the kind of man who accepted no for an answer. "She's under my protection," Nathan called back. "Leave now while you still can." Taggart laughed, the sound ugly in the morning quiet. "Your protection don't mean shit, Cross. There's 5 of us and 1 of you. Then you better hope you're all good shots, because I sure as hell am." The first bullet shattered the window beside Nathan's head, glass exploding inward. He dropped flat, heard Kaya do the same. The siege had begun. For the next 10 minutes, gunfire tore through the morning. Nathan returned fire, carefully conserving ammunition, making every shot count. He hit one man in the shoulder, saw him go down cursing. Kaya used the rifle he'd taught her to shoot her aim, surprisingly good for someone who'd learned on iron sights instead of the bows her people traditionally use. But 5 against 2 was bad mathematics. The bounty hunters had them pinned, were working their way closer to the cabin. Taggart had sent 2 men around back, preparing to breach through the rear door. Then Nathan smelled it. Smoke. "They're burning us out," he shouted to Kaya. She looked toward the back of the cabin, where smoke was beginning to seep through cracks in the wood. Someone had thrown a torch onto the roof and the dry timber was catching fast. "We have to run," Nathan said. "Out the back door toward the rocks. It's our only chance." Kaya nodded, her face set in determined lines. They gathered what they could, weapons and ammunition, and prepared to make their break. Nathan kicked open the back door, Winchester ready, and they ran. Bullets kicked up dust around their feet. One whispered past Nathan's ear, close enough that he felt the heat of it. They made it 20 yards, 30, heading for a jumble of boulders that would provide some cover. That's when the war cries came. From the hills to the east, Apache warriors appeared like ghosts, made solid 6 of them on horseback, moving with the fluid grace of men who'd been born to this land and knew its every secret. They came fast and hard, catching the bounty hunters completely by surprise. The lead warrior, young and fierce, with a face painted for war, let out a cry that seemed to shake the very air. He fired as he rode his rifle, finding its target, and one of the bounty hunters went down hard. "Nikan!" Kaya's voice was joy and relief mixed together. The Apache warriors engaged the bounty hunters in a running fight, circling them, using tactics that turned the hunters into the hunted. Taggart tried to rally his men, tried to organize a defense, but it was like trying to fight shadows. The Apache were there, and then they weren't appearing from different angles, keeping the white men off balance and afraid. Nathan and Kaya reached the rocks, took cover, watched the chaos unfold. Another warrior appeared, older, moving with authority and confidence. He rode a paint horse, and even in the middle of violence, his presence commanded attention. "My father," Kaya breathed. Dakota sat tall on his horse, a rifle in his hands, but not aimed, just held ready. He watched the fight with eyes that missed nothing, calculating, commanding. When one of his warriors got too aggressive, too caught up in the violence, Dakota's voice cut through the noise, sharp and controlling, pulling the young man back. Taggart saw how the wind was blowing and made the only smart choice available. "Retreat, fall back." The bounty hunters broke and ran, 3 of them still mounted, 1 wounded, and barely hanging on, 1 dead in the dust. They rode hard for the west, away from the Apache, away from Nathan's ranch, away from a $50 bounty that had proven far more expensive than they'd calculated. The Apache warriors didn't pursue. They regrouped near the rocks where Nathan and Kaya had taken shelter in their horses stamping and blowing weapons, still ready but the immediate danger passed. Nikan dismounted first. He was 28, lean and muscular, with eyes that burned with barely controlled fury. Those eyes found Nathan, and the hatred there was pure and uncomplicated. "This is the white man," he said in Apache words Nathan didn't understand but whose meaning was clear in the tone. Kaya stepped forward, placing herself between her brother and Nathan. She spoke rapidly in Apache, her voice urgent, explaining. Nikan listened, but his expression didn't soften. Then Dakota dismounted. He moved with the careful dignity of a leader, a man who understood that every action carried weight, sent messages. He was 53 years old, his face marked by weather and worry, his hair shot through with gray. But his back was straight, his gaze steady, and when he looked at Nathan, there was assessment, their judgment being formed. Kaya ran to her father and he embraced her with a fierceness that spoke to the depth of his fear, the relief of finding her alive. They spoke quickly in Apache Kaya, explaining Dakota, listening occasionally, glancing at Nathan over his daughter's shoulder. Nathan stood very still, rifle in hand, but pointed at the ground, trying to look neither threatening nor weak. He was acutely aware that he was one man facing 6 Apache warriors, that his life at this moment depended entirely on what Kaya had told them, on what they chose to believe. Finally, Dakota released his daughter and walked toward Nathan. He stopped 10 feet away, close enough to speak, far enough to maintain the dignity of a leader meeting a potential enemy. Kaya came to stand beside her father, translating. "My father asked why you protected me." Nathan looked directly at Dakota, speaking slowly so Kaya could translate accurately. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because I've made mistakes in the past and I'm trying to do better." The translation happened. Dakota's eyes never left Nathan's face, reading him like a book written in a language Nathan didn't fully understand. "My father says many white men know what is right. Few do it. I know. I was one of them once." When Kaya translated that, something shifted in Dakota's expression. Not softness exactly, but a kind of recognition. He spoke again, longer this time, his voice carrying authority. Kaya's face went pale as she listened. When she translated, her voice shook. "My father asks if you know about East Canyon, 3 years ago, where his wife died." This was it, the moment Nathan had known was coming, but hadn't let himself fully imagine. He met Dakota's eyes and spoke the truth that had been burning in him for 3 years. "I was a deputy sheriff then. I heard the men planning the raid. I knew it would happen. I could have stopped it. I didn't. I was afraid." Nathan's voice didn't waver, didn't make excuses. "Your wife Ayana died because I stayed silent. I'm sorry. Those words don't bring her back. Don't fix what I failed to do, but they're all I have." The silence that followed felt like it lasted hours. Nikan's hand moved to his knife, his body tensing. Kaya's eyes filled with tears as she translated her mother's name. Her death, all of it, laid bare in the morning light. Dakota stood very still, his face unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice controlled, but heavy with grief. Kaya translated through her tears. "My father says you didn't kill his wife, but you could have saved her. That burden is yours to carry. Not punishment from him. The punishment is already inside you. He can see it." Nathan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Dakota continued and Kaya forced herself to translate. "But you saved his daughter. You risked everything to protect her. That doesn't erase your failure, but it shows you've learned, that you're trying to be different." Nikan exploded in rapid Apache, clearly arguing, clearly disagreeing with his father's measured response. Dakota cut him off with a sharp word, then turned back to Nathan. "My father says we will leave now. I must go with my people. They need me to help negotiate with the government to secure land where we can live in peace." Nathan looked at Kaya, saw the truth in her eyes. This was the choice she'd been moving toward since she'd arrived. Family duty, the survival of her people. He understood it. Even as it hurt, he understood. "I know," he said quietly. "Go, help your father, help your people." Dakota spoke again, this time with something that might have been approval in his tone. "My father says you are a man of honor despite your past failure. He asks that you remember this. Failure doesn't define a man unless he refuses to learn from it. You learned. That matters." The Apache warriors began mounting up. Kaya looked at Nathan, and the conflict on her face was clear. She wanted to stay. Part of her wanted to stay, but she couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I have to go, she said in English now, just for him. My people need me. My father is getting old. Nikan is brave, but not patient. I'm the bridge between them and the future. I understand. But Nathan, I'll come back. If I can, if there's a way, I'll come back. He wanted to believe her, wanted to hope. But hope was a dangerous thing for a man like him, a man who'd learned that the world broke promises as easily as it broke people. Just be safe, he said instead. That's all I ask. Kaya stepped forward, placed her hand on his cheek briefly, a gesture of connection and goodbye and possibility, all mixed together. Then she turned and mounted the horse that Nikan held ready for her. The Apache band rode east toward the hills, toward the mountains beyond, toward whatever future waited for them, in a world that was changing faster than anyone could control. Nathan watched until they disappeared, until the dust settled, until he was alone again, with nothing but the smoldering ruins of his cabin and the weight of everything that had happened. He turned to look at what remained. The cabin was destroyed, the roof collapsed, the walls blackened and crumbling. 3 years of work gone in 30 minutes of violence. But he was alive. Kaya was alive and free. And somehow, impossibly, he'd been given something he hadn't known he'd needed. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement. Recognition that trying mattered, that learning from failure counted for something. Nathan Cross sat down on a rock and watched the sun rise fully over the desert he'd chosen to make his home. The morning was new, full of possibility and pain in equal measure, and he had work to do. Always there was work to do. Behind him, hoofbeats approached. He turned a hand moving to his rifle, then relaxed. Sarah Mackenzie rode up, her face creased with worry, a wagon following behind her loaded with supplies. Saw the smoke from town, she said, dismounting. Figured you might need help rebuilding. Nathan looked at her, this woman who'd stood by him when she had no reason to, who'd risked her business and her reputation for nothing more than the principle that doing right mattered more than being safe. Thank you, he said, the words inadequate but sincere. Sarah surveyed the damage, then nodded briskly. Well, we better get started. Can't rebuild a cabin standing around talking about it. And so they did. As the sun climbed higher and the day warmed, Nathan Cross began again. Building, working, living, waiting to see what the future might bring, knowing that whatever came, he'd face it as the man he was becoming, not the man he'd been. The ruins of the cabin stood like broken teeth against the morning sky, blackened timbers and collapsed walls marking where Nathan's home had been. Sarah Mackenzie walked through the debris with the practiced eye of someone who had seen destruction before and knew that survival meant moving forward, not dwelling on what was lost. The main posts are still good, she said, kicking at a support beam that had somehow survived the fire. Stone foundations intact. You've got something to build on. Nathan nodded, already calculating in his mind. 3 years ago, he'd built this cabin alone, working from dawn to dark, learning as he went. Now he'd have to do it again. The thought should have been daunting. Instead, it felt almost like an opportunity. A chance to build something better. Something that acknowledged who he'd become instead of who he'd been running from. I'll need lumber, he said, a lot of it, and nails, tar paper for the roof window glass. I can get you credit at the store. Pay me back when you can. Sarah looked at him steadily. I know you're good for it. The work began that afternoon. Sarah returned to town to gather supplies and spread word that Nathan needed help, though she wasn't optimistic about the response. Most of Red Mesa had already chosen sides and they hadn't chosen his. But the next morning, Jacob Miller arrived with his wagon loaded with salvaged timber from his uncle's old barn. The wood was weathered but solid, and the young man's face showed determination that went beyond simple gratitude for the lessons Nathan had taught him. Figured you could use this, Jacob said, climbing down from the wagon seat. Uncle won't be needing it anymore, and you've given me more than I can repay. Nathan felt something tight loosen in his chest. You don't owe me anything. Maybe not, but I'm here anyway. So where do we start? They started with clearing. Days of hauling away charred wood, sorting through what could be salvaged and what had to be discarded. The work was hard and dirty, left them both covered in soot and ash, but there was something cleansing about it too. Taking away the damage, exposing the foundation, preparing to build something new. While they worked, Nathan taught. Not just construction techniques, but the philosophy behind them, the way Dutch Vanderberg had taught him years ago. How to read wood grain to know where it would be strongest. How to plan for expansion, for change, for the possibility that life might require more space than you initially imagined. How to build not just for yourself, but for whoever might come after. A man's legacy isn't what he leaves behind, Nathan said one afternoon as they were setting corner posts. It's what he teaches others to continue. That's why we're taking time to do this right, even when fast would be easier. Because you're learning and someday you'll teach someone else. Jacob, holding a post steady while Nathan tamped earth around it, looked thoughtful. Did your teacher Dutch, did he know he was leaving you a legacy? I think so. He never said it directly, but the way he taught, the care he took, it was clear he was passing something on that mattered to him. Not just skills, but values. The idea that work done right has dignity, regardless of what the work is. By the end of the first week, they had the frame up. Rough and skeletal, but standing a promise of what would come. Sarah brought food, sometimes staying to help, sometimes just keeping them company while they ate. Her daughter Emma came once, curious and shy, bringing fresh bread her mother had taught her to bake. "Is it true you protected an Apache lady?" Emma asked Nathan with the directness of children who haven't learned that some questions aren't polite. "Emma," Sarah's voice carried warning. But Nathan shook his head. "It's all right." He looked at the girl, seeing genuine curiosity rather than judgment. "Yes, she was hurt and needed help, so I helped her. Mama says that's what Jesus would do." "Your mama's right." Emma considered this, then nodded, satisfied with the answer, in the way children are, when something makes sense to their uncomplicated understanding of right and wrong. The second week brought walls. They worked with the salvaged barnwood fitting boards together, leaving spaces for windows that Nathan would buy when he had money again. The cabin was taking shape, larger than before, with a separate room that could serve as storage, or Nathan found himself thinking, without quite meaning to, as living space for someone else, if someone else ever came back. Late one afternoon, as the sun painted the desert in shades of amber and gold, Jacob asked the question that had clearly been building in him for days. "Will she come back, the Apache woman?" Nathan drove another nail home before answering. "I don't know. She has responsibilities to her people. They need her. But you want her to." It wasn't a question. Nathan looked at the young man, saw the understanding there, the recognition of something Nathan had been trying not to acknowledge even to himself. "What I want doesn't matter much. She has to make her own choices. That's what freedom means. Real freedom, not just the word we throw around." Still, Jacob persisted with the optimism of youth. "Seems like if two people care about each other, they ought to be able to find a way. Sometimes caring means letting go, means wanting what's best for them, even when what's best doesn't include you." Jacob was quiet for a while, hammering nails with more force than necessary. Then he said, "That's a hard way to love someone." Nathan stopped working and looked at him. "Yes, it is, but sometimes the hard way is the only honest way." Lessons in living. By the third week, the cabin had a roof again. Not fancy, just tar paper and shingles, but it would keep out rain and hold in heat when winter came. They'd put in 2 windows, real glass that Sarah had ordered special from Tucson, and a door that hung straight and closed tight. The interior was still rough floorboards, unfinished, the walls bare, but it was shelter. It was home. And that night, for the first time since the attack, Nathan slept under his own roof again. The next morning, he and Jacob sat on the porch steps that Nathan had built higher and wider than before, wide enough for 2 people to sit comfortably. They drank coffee as the sun rose, and Nathan found himself talking about Dutch Vanderberg, about the old rancher who'd taken in a confused young man and taught him what it meant to build a life. Dutch used to say that legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about making sure that good things don't die with you. Nathan cradled his coffee cup in both hands, feeling the warmth seep into his palms. "He taught me ranching, sure, but more than that, he taught me that how you do things matters as much as what you do. That dignity comes from work done right, from promises kept, from standing by your word, even when it costs you." Jacob listened with the intensity of someone who understood he was receiving more than just stories, that he was being given something valuable and irreplaceable. "He died 6 years ago," Nathan continued. "Worked right up until the end, wouldn't slow down even when his body was failing. The day before he died, he was teaching me how to graft fruit trees, talking about harvests he'd never see. And you know what he said?" Jacob shook his head. "He said, These trees will feed people long after I'm gone. That's what work is for Nathan. Not just to feed yourself today, but to feed people you'll never meet tomorrow. That's when I understood what he'd been trying to teach me all along, that we're not here just for ourselves. We're here to make the world a little better, a little easier for whoever comes after. The young man was quiet, absorbing this. Then he said, "You're doing that, teaching me. Someday I'll teach someone else and Dutch's wisdom will keep going." That's the idea. Knowledge that dies with one person is wasted. But knowledge that gets passed on, that grows, that helps more people as it spreads, that's the kind of immortality that matters. Not monuments or fame, but useful things living on in useful hands. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence, watching the desert come alive with morning light. A hawk circled overhead hunting. Cattle lowed in the distance. The world turned on, indifferent to human philosophy, but shaped by it nonetheless, one small action at a time. News from the world. A month after Kaya had ridden away with her father and brother, Sarah arrived at the ranch with more than just supplies. She carried a newspaper 3 weeks old that had come up from Tucson with the mail coach. "You need to see this," she said, unfolding the paper and pointing to an article on the second page. Nathan read slowly, his lips moving slightly with the words the way they did when he was concentrating. The headline read, "Apache Band Secures Limited Territory in Negotiation." The article described how a leader named Dakota had successfully argued for a small parcel of land in the mountains protected territory where his people could live without threat of forced relocation. The negotiation had been contentious. The article noted with many government officials opposed to any concessions, but Dakota's patience in the advocacy of his daughter, described as a skilled translator and negotiator, had won the day. Nathan's hands trembled slightly as he held the paper. "She did it. They did it." "Sounds like she was instrumental," Sarah said. "The article mentions her several times. Says she was able to bridge an understanding between the two sides, explained Apache concerns in terms the government men could understand." Pride swelled in Nathan's chest, mixed with something else. Longing, maybe. Or just the ache of missing someone whose absence had become a constant weight he'd learned to carry, but never quite gotten used to. "That's good," he said, his voice rough. "That's real good." But Sarah heard what he hadn't said. "But the article also mentions resistance. Says not all Apache are happy with the agreement, think it gives up too much. And not all whites are happy either, think it gives the Apache anything at all." Nathan folded the paper carefully. She's caught in the middle trying to make peace while both sides are pulling at her. She knew that when she left. She chose it anyway. "I know. Doesn't make it easier." Sarah put her hand on his shoulder, the gesture maternal and comforting. "You love her." It wasn't a question, so Nathan didn't bother denying it. "I do, which is why I have to let her do what she needs to do, even if what she needs doesn't include me." "You're a good man, Nathan Cross, better than most. I hope she knows that. I hope she's safe, that's all that matters." But safe was a relative term in a world where violence simmered just beneath the surface, where old hatreds died hard, and new ones were born every day. Nathan knew this, carried this knowledge like a stone in his gut. All he could do was hope and keep building, keep working, keep creating something worth coming back to, if she ever could. Words across distance. 6 weeks after Kaya had left, Nathan was mending fence on the eastern boundary when he saw it. An arrow standing upright in a fence post, quivering slightly from the force of its landing. His heart jumped. He looked around quickly, scanning the hills, but saw no one. Tied to the arrow's shaft was a piece of tanned leather, folded and secured with a thin strip of rawhide. Nathan's hands shook as he untied it, unfolded. It saw words written in careful English. "Nathan, my father's work continues. The negotiations are slow, like trying to convince a mountain to move. Many on both sides don't trust, don't want peace. I don't blame them after so much blood. Nikan is learning patience. It doesn't come natural to him, but he tries for my father's sake. I think of you often, of your ranch, of the quiet mornings and the way the desert looks when the sun rises, of feeling safe for the first time in longer than I can remember. I'm not ready to come back yet. There's still work here, still things that need me. But I wanted you to know I haven't forgotten, that I think about the man who stood when others would have run, who spoke truth when silence would have been safer. When the time is right, if it ever is, I'll return. If you still want me to, be well, be safe. Kaya Nathan read the letter 3 times, then a fourth, memorizing every word. He held the leather to his face, smelled the faint scent of wood smoke and sage that clung to it, proof that she'd held this, that her hands had folded it and tied it and trusted it to reach him. He went back to the cabin, found paper and pencil, and wrote his reply. His handwriting was rough, unpracticed, but the words were clear. Kaya, take all the time you need. Your people need you, and that matters more than anything else. What you're doing, building peace, it's harder than any work I've ever done. Braver, too. The ranch is standing again. Built it bigger this time, with room for 2, if 2 ever becomes right. Jacob is learning fast. He'll be a good rancher someday, maybe better than me. Sarah still brings food and news and friendship I don't deserve, but am grateful for. Winter is coming. I've put up enough hay for the cattle and wood for the fire. The well is deep and the fences are strong. Everything is ready. Everything is waiting. Whenever you're ready, I'll be here. Nathan, he rode to the fence post where the arrow had been tied, his letter to a thin branch he'd stripped of leaves and stuck it firmly in the ground where it could be seen. Then he rode back to the ranch and tried not to count the days, tried not to watch the eastern hills too closely, tried to just live his life and trust that what was meant to happen would happen in its own time. 2 weeks later, the branch was gone. In its place was another arrow, another piece of leather. Just 3 words this time. I'm still here. Nathan smiled, the first real smile he'd worn since she'd left. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The long winter came to the Arizona desert the way it always did, not with snow but with cold that bit deep and winds that cut like knives. The nights dropped below freezing and the mornings dawned clear and brittle, the sun offering light but little warmth. Nathan worked through it, keeping the cattle fed, keeping himself fed, keeping the ranch functioning the way it had to if it was going to survive. Jacob came less often now, his own place demanding attention as he applied the lessons Nathan had taught him. But he came when he could, and the friendship between them had deepened into something solid and lasting. One afternoon in late December, Sarah arrived with mail, a letter she said that had come from back east. Nathan didn't recognize the handwriting on the envelope, opened it with curiosity that turned to surprise as he read. The letter was from Cole Brennan. I'm in Pennsylvania now, working at a livery stable in a town called Lancaster. It's quiet here. Cold as hell in winter, but honest work, and I sleep better than I have in years. I think about that day at your ranch sometimes, about the choice I made to walk away from the money from the hunting. It was the right choice. Took me a while to understand that, but I do now. You did a good thing standing up for that woman. Doing what was right when it would have been easier not to. I wanted you to know that. Wanted you to know that it mattered at least to one person who was watching. Margaret would have liked you. She always said there were good people in the world, if you looked hard enough, if you gave them a chance to show who they really were. I spent 5 years proving her wrong. You reminded me she was right. Take care of yourself. Take care of that ranch. And if the Apache woman comes back, you hold on to her. Love's too rare a thing to let slip away. Cole Brennan. Nathan folded the letter carefully, added it to the small collection of important papers he kept in a wooden box. Cole's words mattered, validation from a man who'd walked a hard road and chosen finally to walk a different way. The winter deepened. Nathan sat by his fire at night, read books he'd read, before thought about the year that had passed and the changes it had brought. A year ago, he'd been alone, convinced that solitude was what he deserved, that isolation was the price of his failure. Now he had friends. He had a student who was becoming a rancher, becoming a man. He had Sarah's steady friendship and Emma's uncomplicated acceptance. He had letters from a woman who thought of him, who remembered him, who might someday come back. He had Nathan realize with something like wonder a life again. Not the life he'd had before, not the life he'd thought he was building when he'd first claimed this land. Something different, something better maybe, because it was built on truth instead of hiding, on connection instead of isolation. The hardest lesson, he thought, was learning that redemption wasn't a destination. It was a direction. You didn't arrive at being redeemed. You just kept walking toward it, one choice at a time and one day at a time, one act of courage or kindness or honesty at a time. And maybe if you walked long enough, if you stayed true to the path, you look back one day and realize you'd traveled farther than you'd thought possible. The spring returned. Spring came late that year, winter holding on with stubborn fingers until March finally broke its grip. The desert bloomed briefly, wildflowers erupting in impossible colors before the heat returned to reclaim the land. Nathan was working the south fence line when he saw the rider. A single figure on horseback coming from the east, moving with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly where they were going and why. His heart knew before his mind did. He set down his tools and walked to meet her. Not running, not rushing, just moving with steady purpose toward the woman who'd left 5 months ago and was now impossibly coming back. Kaya dismounted while she was still 20 feet away, and for a moment they just looked at each other. She was thinner than he remembered, her face showing the strain of the work she'd been doing, the weight of carrying a responsibility for peace between people who mostly wanted war. But her eyes were clear and steady, and when she walked toward him, her steps were sure. "You came back," Nathan said, the words inadequate, but all he had. "I said I would. I didn't know if you could, if you'd be able to." "Neither did I." No, Kaya stopped a few feet from him, close enough to touch, but not touching, leaving space for the conversation they needed to have. "The negotiations are settled. The land is secured. Not as much as we wanted, but enough. My father can manage the rest. Nikan has learned to negotiate instead of just fighting. They don't need me every day anymore. But they do need you sometimes. Yes, I'll have to go back to visit, regularly help when tensions rise. This isn't leaving my people. It's finding a way to live in both worlds." Nathan nodded, understanding. "What are you proposing?" "I want to build something here. A bridge between Apache and settlers. Use your ranch as a trading post. A place where people can meet without weapons, where they can exchange goods and maybe eventually trust. It'll be hard, dangerous sometimes, but it's worth trying. The people in Red Mesa won't like it. Some won't, but some will. Sarah will, Jacob will, and over time, maybe more. Change doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small steps, in daily choices, in proving that another way is possible." Nathan looked at her, at this woman who'd come into his life on the end of a rope, injured and angry and rightfully mistrustful, who'd seen the worst of what his people could do and still believed peace was possible, who was choosing actively and consciously to build bridges instead of walls. "I'll help," he said. "Whatever you need, whatever it takes, I'll help you build it." Kaya's face softened, and she stepped closer. "I can't promise it'll work. Can't promise we won't fail, that people won't fight us every step." "I know. And I can't promise I'll always be here. When my father needs me, when my people need me, I'll have to go." "I know that too. Can you live with that? With me being here and gone, with never being sure how long I'll stay?" Nathan reached out and took her hand, feeling the warmth and strength of it. "I've spent 3 years learning to live with uncertainty, learning that the only real mistake is not trying. So yes, I can live with it. I want to live with it. I want to build this with you, whatever this becomes." She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, searching for doubt or hesitation. Finding none, she smiled, and the smile transformed her entire face, made her look younger and older, at the same time both burdened by all she'd seen and hopeful for what might come. "Then let's get started," she said. They walked together toward the cabin, toward the ranch that would become something more than just one man's home, toward the future they'd build together, uncertain and fragile, and worth every risk. 1 year forward, the trading post officially opened on a bright morning in April of 1879, exactly 1 year after Kaya had first been brought to Nathan's ranch. The cabin had been expanded again, a separate structure built 30 feet from the main house, designed for commerce rather than living. Inside were tables displaying goods from both Apache and settler communities. Woven baskets sat beside metal tools. Tanned hides shared space with cotton fabric. Dried herbs that Apache women gathered were arranged next to flour and sugar from Sarah's store. It was a small collection, modest, but it represented something larger than the sum of its parts. The first customers came tentatively, suspicious but curious. An Apache woman arrived with her daughter, trading intricate beadwork for needles and threads she couldn't make herself. A settler rancher, not from Red Mesa, but from a spread 15 miles south, brought wool to exchange for moccasins that would last longer than any boots he could buy. Not everyone approved. John Hollis had made his opposition clear, spreading word through Red Mesa that anyone who traded with the Apache or with Nathan Cross was betraying their own kind. Some listened to him, others didn't. Slowly, cautiously, a new pattern began to establish itself. Jacob Miller had become more than a student. He was Nathan's partner, now managing the ranch work while Nathan and Kaya ran the trading post. The young man had filled out, gained confidence, transformed from the uncertain boy who'd arrived asking for help into someone who gave it as often as he received it. Sarah brought Emma regularly, and the girl had taken to helping Kaya with the trading, learning Apache words, and settler customs with the easy adaptability of children. She translated sometimes when words failed, bridged gaps with her innocent insistence that people were just people regardless of which side of an imaginary line they'd been born on. On the one-year anniversary of the trading post's opening, Dakota arrived with Nikan and a small group from the Apache settlement. It was an official visit, a gesture of support, and also a test. How would the settlers react to Apache coming openly in daylight for purposes of peace rather than conflict? Nathan and Kaya stood together on the porch as Dakota dismounted. The old leader moved more slowly now, age settling into his bones, but his dignity was undiminished. Nikan stayed on his horse, watchful, protective, his hand never far from his weapon, even here, even now. Dakota spoke in Apache, and Kaya translated. My father says this place is good. It gives him hope that his wife's dream of peace was not foolish, that maybe someday her death will mean something more than just more hatred. Nathan bowed his head slightly, acknowledging both the words and the weight behind them. Tell him he honors me by coming here. That I'll do everything I can to make sure this place stands, that it grows, that it proves peace is possible. The translation happened. Dakota nodded, then surprised everyone by speaking in English words he'd been learning from his daughter. You keep promise. That is good. My daughter chose well. Nikan's eyes narrowed at that. Something there he hadn't noticed or hadn't let himself acknowledge before. You're staying with him. Truly staying. Kaya met her brother's eyes steadily. I'm building something with him. I'm here and with our people, both places, both worlds. It's where I need to be. And if you have to choose, if the whites attack again, if there's war, then I'll fight beside my people. Nathan knows this. He accepts it. Nathan nodded confirmation. I love your sister enough to let her make her own choices, even when those choices might take her away from me. Something shifted in Nikan's expression. Not acceptance exactly, but maybe the beginning of understanding. He dismounted, walked over to Nathan, and extended his hand. The gesture was stiff, formal, but genuine. You protected her when you didn't have to, Nikan said, in careful English. You stood against your own people for her. That means something. Not everything, but something. Nathan clasped the offered hand, felt the strength in it, the warrior's grip. It means I try to do better than I did before. That's all any man can do. They held the handshake for a long moment, two men from different worlds acknowledging a fragile truce built on one woman's courage and the slim hope that violence didn't have to be the only answer. The visit passed peacefully. Dakota inspected the trading post, approved of what he saw, promised to send more people to trade. Some would come, he warned. Others wouldn't, too scarred by the past to believe in the future. But enough would come. Enough to keep the bridge standing. That evening, after the Apache had left, after the last of the day's trading had concluded, Nathan and Kaya sat on the porch watching the sun set. The sky was painted in impossible colors, gold and red and purple, bleeding together in ways that seemed too beautiful to be real. We should make this official, Kaya said quietly. Nathan looked at her. Official how? I don't know, not marriage, not in the way your people do it or mine, but something, a recognition that we're building this together, that we're partners in more than just the trading post. Nathan considered this. Traditional marriage would never work, would satisfy neither Apache custom nor settler law, would please nobody and solve nothing. But a commitment, a public acknowledgement of their partnership, that could work. That could mean something. A ceremony, he said slowly, both peoples present. Your father, Sarah Jacob. We stand together and say to everyone that we're building this bridge, this crossing between worlds, and that we're doing it together, equal partners. Neither one owes the other, neither one owns the other. Just two people choosing to walk the same path. Kaya smiled, and it was the smile he'd learned to treasure, the one that showed up rarely, but meant everything when it did. Yes, that's exactly right, the crossing. Not his place or my place. Our place. Well, 2 months later, on a warm June evening, they held the ceremony. It wasn't elaborate, no preacher, no legal documents, just two communities gathered to witness a commitment. Dakota stood on one side with Nikon and a dozen Apache. Sarah stood on the other with Jacob Emma and a handful of settlers brave enough to cross the invisible line. In the middle, Nathan and Kaya faced each other. Sarah had sewn Kaya a dress that blended both worlds' cotton fabric with Apache beadwork. Nathan wore his best shirt clean and pressed. They spoke no vows in the traditional sense. Instead, they made promises to the people gathered, to keep building the bridge, to honor both heritages, to stand together in the space between worlds. Dakota blessed them in Apache. Sarah said a prayer in English. And when it was done, both sides shared a meal, the first time many of them had broken bread together. It wasn't perfect. Some people left early, others stayed but kept to their own kind. But it was a beginning. The crossing wasn't just a place anymore. It was a commitment witnessed and acknowledged. The night deepened, the stars wheeled overhead, and two people from different worlds sat together in the place they'd built between them, the place called the crossing, and knew that while the future was uncertain, while violence and hatred still existed, while peace was never guaranteed, they'd done something that mattered. They'd chosen a different way. And that choice, repeated daily, reinforced by action, proved by commitment, was its own kind of revolution. Small and quiet and easily overlooked, but real nonetheless. Epilogue: Lessons for the Living. The fire had burned down to embers by the time Nathan Cross finished his story. He was 66 years old, his hair white, his hands gnarled with age and work. But his eyes were clear as he looked at his grandson Samuel across the dying flames. The boy had listened for hours, not interrupting, not questioning, just absorbing the story of how his grandfather had learned about honor and redemption and the price of both. Now he sat in silence, processing everything he'd heard. "So, Grandmother Kaya," Samuel said finally, "she's inside right now. Sleeping. She's 55 now, gets tired easier than she used to. She catches all of us eventually. And the crossing, it still operates." Nathan nodded. 29 years now, nearly 30. Not always easy. Had some hard times, times when people tried to shut us down, times when violence flared up. But we kept at it. Kaya and me, then Jacob and his family, then others who believed what we were doing mattered. It's bigger now, handles more trade. Some folks from both sides have even built houses nearby, created a community that doesn't quite fit into either world, but belongs to both. Samuel looked at the photograph. He still held the image of a young woman with fierce eyes and unbending spine. She must be strong. Strongest person I've ever known, and the kindest, though she hides it well. She taught me that strength and kindness aren't opposites, that you can stand firm and still be gentle, that you can fight for what matters without becoming hateful. The old man poked at the fire, sending up a small shower of sparks. "That's what I need you to understand, Samuel. This ranch, this trading post, this bridge between peoples, it'll be yours someday. Not just the land and buildings, but the responsibility. The commitment to keeping that bridge standing, even when it's hard, even when people tell you it's not worth the effort." "I understand. Do you—" Nathan's voice was sharp suddenly, the tone of a man who'd learned that understanding words and understanding truth were very different things. "This isn't romantic. It's not an adventure story. It's hard work every single day. It's choosing to do what's right when doing what's easy would be simpler. It's standing up when your legs want to fold. It's speaking out when silence would be safer." Samuel met his grandfather's eyes steadily. "You just told me about a time when you chose silence and 12 people died. Then you told me about all the times after when you chose different, chose better. I heard both parts, grandfather, the failure and the redemption. I understand that one doesn't erase the other, but that trying matters anyway." Nathan studied his grandson's face, saw something there that gave him hope. Not naivete, not simple optimism, but a kind of clear-eyed determination that suggested the boy, nearly a man, now might actually have what it took to carry on what Nathan and Kaya had started. "Your father," Nathan said quietly, "my son, he never really understood what we were trying to do here. He left, moved to California, wanted nothing to do with the trading post or the Apache or any of it. I don't blame him. He grew up surrounded by tension, by the constant threat of violence. He wanted something easier." But he sent me here because he knew you needed to learn this, needed to understand your heritage, both sides of it. Your grandmother is half Apache, which makes you part of that world too, whether you claim it or not. Samuel nodded slowly. I want to claim it. I want to learn. That's why I'm here. Nathan felt something release in his chest, a knot of worry he'd been carrying for years. Then I'll teach you. Not just ranching, not just trading. I'll teach you what it means to build bridges, to stand in the gap between two worlds and refuse to let either side pull you completely away. It's lonely sometimes, that middle ground, but it's necessary, and it's honorable. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to something almost fierce. Honor isn't about never falling, Samuel. It's about getting back up after you fall. It's about standing for what's right even when you're late, even when you have already failed once. A man who never makes mistakes is either a liar or hasn't lived. But a man who makes mistakes and doesn't learn from them, doesn't change, doesn't try to do better. That's not a man. That's just a breathing corpse waiting to be buried. Samuel absorbed this, then asked, do you think you've made up for what you didn't do for East Canyon? Nathan was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. An owl called somewhere in the darkness. Finally he spoke. No, I don't think you ever fully make up for that kind of failure. Those people are still dead. Kaya's mother is still gone. Nothing I do brings them back. But I've tried to honor their memory by being different, by creating something that might prevent more deaths, more hatred. That's not redemption. It's just effort. Sometimes effort is all you have. He stood slowly, joints protesting, and looked toward the cabin where Kaya slept. But I'll tell you this, I sleep better than I did 30 years ago. I look at myself in the mirror and don't hate what I see. I've built something good with a woman I love, created a place where people can meet without fear. And I've taught a few young people, you included now, how to keep building after I'm gone. Nathan turned back to his grandson. That's what legacy really means. Not monuments or fame or people remembering your name. It's about making sure that good things don't die with you. That the knowledge you gained, the lessons you learned, the values you held, they keep going. Through your students, through your children, through everyone you touched by trying to live right. Samuel stood too moved to stand beside his grandfather. Together they looked out at the dark land, at the crossing barely visible in the distance, at the life Nathan had built from ash and failure and stubborn determination. I'm ready, the boy said, to learn, to carry this forward, to become the kind of man who stands up. Nathan put his hand on Samuel's shoulder, felt the strength there, the potential. Then we'll start tomorrow, at dawn, because ranching and bridge building both start early and end late. But they're worth it. God, they're worth it. They stood together in the cold darkness, two generations bound by blood and story, and the weight of responsibility passed from one to the next. Inside the cabin, Kaya slept dreaming perhaps of her mother, of the peace Ayana had believed in, of the trading post that proved that belief hadn't been foolish after all. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. The desert breathed around them, ancient and patient. And in the small circle of firelight, the future took shape in the form of a young man learning what his grandfather had learned too late and too painfully. That silence in the face of wrong is wrong itself. That courage is choosing right even when you're afraid. That redemption isn't a place you arrive at, but a direction you walk one step at a time for as long as you live. Nathan Cross was 66 years old, his body worn, and his time running short, but his work wasn't finished. Not while there was still someone to teach, still wisdom to pass on, still bridges to build and maintain and defend against those who would rather see them burn. Tomorrow he would wake at dawn. He would teach his grandson how to read fence wire and track cattle and negotiate with people who didn't speak your language. He would pass on everything Dutch had taught him, everything Kaya had taught him, everything 30 years of trying to do better had taught him. And maybe if he taught well enough, if Samuel learned truly, the bridge would stand. The crossing would continue, and the peace that had cost so much would endure, fragile and precious and worth every sacrifice. The fire died completely. Nathan banked the embers for morning, and grandfather and grandson walked together into the cabin, into warmth and rest, into the tomorrow that waited for them both. The story was told. The lesson was given. What came next would be written by other hands, lived by other hearts, but built on the foundation of truth and courage, and the simple, stubborn insistence that a better way was possible. if you were brave enough to stand for it, if you were strong enough to build it, if you loved enough to fight for it day after day, choice after choice, until the fighting became living and the living became legacy. That was Nathan Cross's gift to his grandson. Not land or money or comfort, but something infinitely more valuable. The knowledge of how to be a man, the hard way, the honest way, the only way that mattered.